Hey, I'm Tony.
I'm Craig.
And we're coming to you from the corner of a pub.
As the sun was setting on the bright meadows of Shelby, a rebel hand set the head.
I mean, it's funny is, we've talked about this before. Is, we talked about it beforehand. I got to know a lot of my heritage. Great great grandparents were still alive from the 1870s when Mom got to know hers. I got to know mine, born in the early, right at 1904. So we were not that far away, and they were very avid about passing on heritage and who you were and all that. So as we go and we're, trying to pass it on to kids, there's this idea oh yeah, back in those days, in the Gaelic days, everything was a utopia. No, it wasn't. Every spring, people were getting murdered and mass wars were going on, fighting over the same patch every year, because just like every other government, when somebody was able to rule with unconditional authority, it was abused.
Yep.
I mean, it's read it, look at the Bible. There's a reason why there's the 2 books of Kings, and what happens every time over and over and over. So-and-so was king from the age of 12, and they did evil in the sight of the Lord over and over.
Right.
It's just, I just don't understand the willful ignorance to go, oh, well, we'll be different. Why? Because you're riding the last of the coattails of your grandparents and parents' generation that fought for freedom and tried to retain some sort of liberty in this nation.
Right.
You thought it just magically got there. Everybody, what was it, Reagan, that said every generation had to fight for freedom, or else they'll one day tell their kids what it was like to be in the United States where men used to be free.
Yeah.
So, but this generation, it seems like these last couple generations are like, no, it's always been that way. This one's different.
Well, so I think it's interesting because you to that point, look at the founders and look what they came out of. Look what the Declaration articulates were the issues that they had with the crown. And you can find so many of, you can find the Bill of Rights kind of there in the Declaration, because here's the issues that we're having with the crown. Here is the despotism articulated line by line. And then you have, the Bill of Rights listing out these 10 different points that are going to somehow counteract those points that are listed in there in the Declaration. So to me, that kind of gives you a little bit more information as to what the spirit of each one of those amendments is. Why is it important to have free speech? Why is it important to have protection of the right to bear arms? And it's the protection of. It's saying shall not be infringed. I think anyone that's listening to this podcast, there's not much question about if that's granting or protecting a right.
Right.
But you have these people that just came out, they just rebelled. They just not rebelled, but they just fought back against a tyrannical government. Are they really going to create a new government that is going to be unlimited in its powers? That is going to be able to do anything under the guise of the general welfare?
Context is everything, isn't it?
Oh yeah, for sure. So back to the Massachusetts ratification debates. General Brooks, he pointed out that under this Constitution, Congress could not be organized without the repeated acts of the state legislatures. And he went further and stated that if the creating power is dissolved, meaning the states, then the body to be created cannot exist. Yeah. So the whole authority of the federal government to them rested upon the existence and the authority of the states. If the states don't have the authority to create it, then it cannot exist. So the federal government is dependent upon the states. And if the states are creating something, are they going to create something that is just going to take over and now they're going to be subjected to it? They're going to be underneath it?
No. And it shouldn't be lost on today's American, because how many people from either affiliation they claim to have, whether it's Republican or Democrat, are pissed off when the United Nations steps in and says, you need to be doing this.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, you can't tell us what to do. Who are you? But yet it's so foreign to go, well, DC's going to tell remote rural America what they need to do on something that has nothing to do with remote rural America, but they're going to go be put under guidelines that work for Boston or work for New York. And it just, again, what willful ignorance do we have to subject ourselves to go, oh, well, I'm going to believe what this representative said, and that's it, done. Or I'm going to believe that my government's looking out for me, period, and that my government will tell me when my government's overstepping. Okay.
Yeah.
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 Let's see how that worked out.
The federal government's going to move forward. They're going to encroach upon your liberty. Say, whoa, our bad. Hey, we didn't realize. Hey, the line was back there. Let's back that up a little bit.
We're going to back it up and repeal everything. Our bad. You didn't even have to worry about it. See, we did it all by ourselves.
No, I mean, you can't even point to a time where that did happen.
No, there's 0 examples of that in human history.
Yeah. So we've gone over a lot from the Massachusetts ratification debates. Let's move on to a couple from outside of there. Let's go on to Virginia. So they had stated in their form of ratification that they recognize the powers granted under the Constitution could be recalled by the people whenever they appear to have been perverted. They also explicitly stated that every power not granted under the Constitution remained with the people. And then Madison from Virginia states that he stated the same during the ratification debates when he referred to the people as being 13 sovereignties.
Wow.
Yeah, how about that?
And this is the Federalist champion telling you that.
Oh, yeah. All right. He also went on to argue that the states would retain such power, quote, as will give the states the advantages of small republics.
Wow. But see, that's a key term there is republics. And that stood out to me too. I actually got to read just excerpts of that. I didn't get to read the whole thing. And the fact that he refers to the threat to the republic nature of the agreement is mentioned in there. Right. There was something else that he mentioned is that when he talks about clarifying the powers of 98, was it the 1800 clarification they issued out after that? He goes on and clarifies everything they did, and I like how he says that this should only come in handy, and this is, again, the Tony paraphrase version of something that was far more articulate than I've ever been in my entire life, that it was deemed the last in relation to authorities of other departments of the government, not in relation to the rights of the parties to the constitutional compact from which the judicial as well as other departments hold their delegated trust. Plain English, he says these things would happen as a last resort, this nullification practice, this idea of that the government will not, as Woods put it, police itself. And it's when these things, like the judicial branch, which is inherently part of the same government, would not police itself. So the idea of any other idea where we're going to delegate enough power to the federal government who could annul its own power and nobody else is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I love that this came, again, from the champion. So I want to share something with you before you continue on, because I'm really interested in what you're bringing, because, again, this is a learning context for me. So one of the things I found here is I went and looked, and it's amazing what you can do with Google right now before that ever gets abused, but you can just Google something, So I Googled Virginia nullification. And I love to just look at the flip-flopping of modern day people in that. So I found this, and I'm using CNN for a reason, because it's one of our most obvious bias sites. You Fox, CNN are like your two. OAN is getting there, like it's obviously one party, leaning. And this is January 17, 2017, Senator Kane from Virginia. Nullification is a code word, is the name of the article, and that's his quote. And it's talking about where he was adding his voice to the gun control debate, and he was lending his support for President Obama's executive actions at the time. And he was commenting about Senator Rand Paul's desire to nullify the president's orders. And he said nullification is a code word, and they asked, for what? And he says, it's a state rights argument that gets used in times of great controversy. The president is acting by executive power that is legally conferred on him. And as you pointed out, you went over these executive orders. They're basic, common sense things. So he was pressed on to clarify the code word statement, And he answered, well, we'll see what it is. But the notion that we're going to nullify the presidential action when the president is acting pursuant to law, that's just kind of this anti-government rhetoric that I'm surprised to hear somebody in government using. So let's fast forward to, and that was in 2013. So let's fast forward to 2017, April 2017. Kane's statement on President Trump's executive order calling for review of national monuments. And I love this here. Is it says that it goes on and says President Trump has shown that he sees no value in these sacred places except perhaps in resources drilled, fracked, or mined from them. I intend to go down to Fort Monroe at my first opportunity and talk about the value of this site. And he goes on talking about how he would fight back against this executive order made within what he just stated 4 years before when it suited him was conferred upon him. And so again, this idea that, these guys are going to naturally look out for me. No, they're not. They're going to naturally look out for what helps them gain their popularity, their power, their income. I mean, if somebody is incentivized to benefit from something, they're going to ensure that incentivized benefit stays there. And unfortunately, that means whether you're aligned Republican or Democrat, if you're incentivized and benefiting from that platform, that's your self-interest. You may say something totally opposite, but I thought the irony of this is that Madison, wait, what are you reading? What are you reading from? Virginia's resolutions?
Their ratification form.
Yeah.
So this is concerning whether or not they're going to ratify the Constitution. This is before the Constitution's even in place.
Exactly.
And previously, the first one was him going back saying, don't look to us to get your understanding of the Constitution. Look to the states. What did they say? What were their people saying?
And then you look at today's example of what that looks like now. We've talked about, you've read Nullification for Virginia up to Massachusetts, and you got a guy going, it's just rhetoric. It doesn't mean anything.
Right. Oh, and you have modern day, you have guys like him, whether he's trying to support Obama or he's trying to fight Trump. Mark Levin has been he's a darling of the right, but he has been, I've heard that man, I would think he was foaming at the mouth when he mentions the term nullification. He gets all, nasally and high pitched and everything, and he yells into the microphone that someone's a nullifier as some sort of pejorative. And I mean, so Jefferson was, Madison was,
and by what you're reading in the primary sources, state conventions were.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's go to a state. Let's go to Virginia. This would be the Virginia resolutions of 1798, and we're in the third paragraph.
All right.
That this assembly doth explicitly and peremptorily declare that it views the powers of the federal government as resulting from the compact to which the states are parties, as limited by the plain sense and intention of the instrument constituting that compact, as no further valid than they are authorized by the grants enumerated in that compact, and that in case of a deliberate, palpable, and dangerous exercise of other powers not granted by the said compact, the states who are parties thereto have the right and are in duty bound to interpose for arresting the progress of the evil, and for maintaining within their respective limits the authorities, rights, and liberties appertaining to them.
Wow.
Okay, now did he say the term nullify? No,
but it's the explanation for the value and what that is what he's saying.
Well, let's go back to the original definition that we gave. Any act that results in a law being void or unenforceable in a given area, that would be interposition. That would be another word for nullification.
So it goes back to that quote that I tried to, and I butchered, that Madison wrote, I think, or the convention wrote on clarification in 1800. When it says that they couldn't understand the delegation of judicial power that would annul the authority that delegated its own power. on top of that. So if
Right.
how are you going to arrest an evil done by a governing body if you've given someone and delegated the power to completely annul the power it was delegated to by those who had delegated it? You see what I mean? It's just this cyclical,
Yep.
does not work thinking.
Right. And so we see it on it's on the right or it's on the left. You can nullify Obamacare because there's no authority for the federal government to get involved in healthcare. And now we're seeing on the other side of things, we're seeing all the support for the federal government going in and straightening out Portland.
Yeah.
Dude,
Oh,
you know
my
what?
gosh.
Portland is Portland's problem. Those are people that are begging for a bigger state, for the state to do more. They want more government. I mean, I've seen Austin Peterson put up some great memes. It's, begs for more government, and they're getting pepper sprayed in the face. More government.
Yeah. And, some of them were standing on their own porches.
Yeah.
Getting hammered with pepper spray. And it's like, whoa. But again, that's what you voted for repeatedly. It's what you asked for. But it doesn't mean that should be subjected on every other place.
Right.
I've loved seeing that mainstream media finally had to pick up these stories of the mass exoduses from the city. New York City is undergoing a mass exodus right now. And I think it means something this time because I think for a long time these cities thought, nah, that'll never happen. But now look at Detroit. Detroit was, turn of the 21st century. Not only was it a mass exodus, it looked like a third world nation in parts of it now because so many people have left. Baltimore started to undergo the same thing after that. So people started to think, well, this is real. Just because we have a city here doesn't mean we're entitled to have a population here.
Right.
And you have these people leaving, and they finally started picking up on mainstream sites going, hey, people are leaving. They're not staying here. They didn't have to stay here. You can get a job elsewhere and move.
Yep.
And that's huge because, we hammer on Texas a lot of times. If you're from Texas, it is drilled into you at a young age that everything's bigger in Texas. Texas is great. You have to take
Government's bigger in Texas.
Yes, it is. We have to take Texas history before you can graduate. Did you know that? You have to take X amount of Texas history before you can go forward.
I never took a Texas history class, but they still take my property taxes.
Yeah, isn't that funny?
How about that?
Yeah, and good luck with that. And the more you buy, the more you're taxed.
Yeah.
So the idea though is that people here have got to be the same way in any other state. Is that but here is the bastion. Here is the safe place. Here's the place where everything is better. And we had this conversation beforehand that Second Amendment rights and homeschooling rights and vaccination freedoms and things these are looked at in every state as we're the best. And then you look at other states, you're going, well, hang on a minute. That's not what I was told. I was told here was the best.
We were talking about Sheriff Mack earlier and that lawsuit they brought against the Clinton administration. There's one sheriff from Texas.
Yeah.
If there's any state you expect when it comes to gun rights, you're going to have a lot of support, it's Texas.
You'd think.
Every stereotype says that. Every movie says that. Reality, not so much.
Yeah. Well, we also all don't ride our horses to work and wear a cowboy hat all the time, at least.
No, not all the time.
Not all the time. You have to take it off when you're inside and eating. Either way, that I guess is where I'm going with this is that you're reading Virginia and I'm reading Virginia Today in the complete willful ignorance of this guy saying, oh, it's a code word. You're telling me you went to school all those years and you never covered this document, your founding documents of your state and your federal entry? Don't give me that, because I can also look at what school he went to and find what kind of constitutional and state legislative courses are required for the type of degree he has. No, it is banking on the fact that people just don't know.
No, they don't know, and it's way easier, like we talked about when we're talking about human behavior, it's way easier to accept whatever you're told instead of investigating it for yourself.
Yeah.
And so that's the beauty of having those primary source documents. It's the beauty of being able to go back and look at the ratification debates. Don't listen to what Mark Levin told you. He was wrong. Don't listen to what, just because it came off Fox News doesn't mean it was right. Good chance it was wrong, full of crap. I've literally saw an article on the Fox News website that was dedicated to pointing out what CNN got wrong about an event. And I read it, and I was not at all informed about what actually happened in the event. It was just them pointing fingers at CNN. And so we don't have journalism anymore. We have this, it's like the media style, this media's own little individual game of identity politics. Are you with this website or that website? Which one do you watch?
And again, we use this, and I don't want to beat a dead horse with this phrase, but I really think this phrase sums up all of the news sources people get from is false dichotomy.
Right.
Every time. You're either this camp or you're this camp. No, I can disagree with both camps. I can do that.
Right.
So there's this guy here, and he quotes, he's an economist. He writes about different viewpoints, and we'll get into this later. He actually writes about the necessity for panics and recessions towards innovation. He calls it creative destruction.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So we've talked about that. It's a necessary component. But he talks about Stanley Milgram's book, Obedience to Authority, and he talks about how he demonstrated our hardwired human nature. That he experimented putting one person in the street staring into the sky at nothing. And people thought this guy was crazy. He just passed him by, didn't pay any attention. And then he took 5 people out there staring at nothing in the sky. And a crowd would, he said, his hypothesis is that a crowd would form because they want to see now what this group of people are observing. And he says the majority of people take comfort in doing as the rest of society does. And then when they're all wrong, they panic. And this goes back to Woods at the beginning of his book, Nullification. He puts in there that when something is given such a what does he say, a spurious cause that it has to get through, it's a matter of great importance, that these desperate times call for reckless measures, and they're put through there. And I think people at that point become put off. They become afraid to speak up or to buck the system, because then you're a murderer, you're a racist, you're this, you're that, instead of just saying, no, this exceeds the line. I can make good decisions. We will make great decisions. We will do what is best, but this exceeds that. Yeah. But yet there's such an ignorance now of that context of what you're reading, when the senator from that same point, that same place, has no idea of that concept. It was just rhetoric.
Well, and that's one of the dangers of the idea we have a living, breathing constitution that grows and changes with the times. No, back to what Fisher Ames and Madison were saying. Look to what the states were saying when they ratified the document. They weren't looking forward to 2020 and thinking of what it might mean in the future. They're looking forward to what they just came from, what they just won their independence from. And they were looking back at the past and human nature and history, and realizing, what does the state tend to do?
Yeah.
What does it lean towards? Does it lean towards liberty, or does it lean towards tyranny? And every time it's tyranny as it grows. I don't care how long we've had a really fortunate run to go as long as the United States is gone. With this form of government, and especially in our lifetime, we've seen, we haven't had anything quite as bad as the Great Depression. We haven't had a world war. We've had a lot of other horrors coming out of war efforts, even though nothing's been declared an actual war by Congress. But we've seen plenty of that, but we haven't seen anything where we've had a nuclear bomb or anything like that go off. But the founders, when they were writing this stuff, man, they were realizing, what does human history what does it tell us about the state, and what did we just experience? And so as we form a new, we already had state governments, and as they're forming a general government, as they referred to it, what do we need to put in place to safeguard the rights? Because it's going to be a more local response, is going to protect the liberty better than one centralized body covering a much larger area. And so they formed it for the benefit of those 13 sovereignties, as Madison called them, and they formed what became the general government, the United States. But they still reserved all those rights, all that authority there in the States, because it's way easier for me to go to Austin than it is for me to go to D.C. There's more accountability there in Austin. Not a whole lot more these days, unfortunately. But even get more local. There's much more accountability for us to go to our county commissioners, us to go to our elected sheriffs, than for us to worry about anything in Austin. So the more local you get, the more the less control it's held by some governing entity, whether it's in D.C. or Austin. If I get smaller and smaller in that little polity, I'm going to have more control. And that's what the founders recognized, and they did what they could to build that in there. But now we have all these states that are too cowardly to do anything about it. Some of them, they really, I don't think that they actually have much interest in growing liberty or preserving liberty.
Right. But, I think when you look at it the way you're describing it there and thinking about what we could do now to change the tide, teaching kids, if you could tell them before you go into just teaching them, here's what the Constitution does, teach them the history of what states have done. Teach them the context of that, and then close it out with the fact that this is an agreement recognizing the limitations. It wasn't, hey, this was an agreement on the mass amount of power this government's going to have.
Right.
We've now seen the history of what states have done. Here's your context. Now we're looking at this agreement coming in. Is this agreement just letting them have free run? I think every kid in the room would go, no, they're restricting what they can do. This common sense approach is where we start to make a difference, I think, is when we start teaching these things with read the context,
right.
Look at it as, and you'll see it as an agreement. Why in the world would you go into agreement to where someone's going to have complete and utter absolute control over any say you have at some point of disagreement? Well, I think a high school kiddo would have no problem going, no, that's not the case. That doesn't make sense. And we're going to have to really press that to get that back into people now when we interact with people is, okay, when on earth in human civilization history did any governing factor just go, hey, I'm going to do this for the best for everybody. You don't even have to worry about it. As a matter of fact, I think history of government said, hey, why don't you go out and die and give up your one chance on earth so we can sit back over here and benefit from it?
Yeah.
That kind of, to me, more sums up what any government's generally done through history. And so the act of, I see these ridiculous, we're going to start a revolution things and all that. At the end of all this, I really think nullification is a peaceful and already existing idea within the realms of the Constitution to say, no. There's
been some criticism for attempts at nullification on the state level, to where they say, well, what's the teeth for this bill? So some states have put forward legislation, or some local representatives put forth some legislation for the state to say, hey, this particular government act, we're not going to recognize it. It's not valid here. And some of that has been on Second Amendment issues. Some of that has been on indefinite detention with the NDAA, and people criticize it and say, well, there's no teeth in this bill. There's not, we're not saying we're going to arrest these federal agents when they come in and try and enforce it. People want to assume that there's going to be some big armed rebellion against this stuff. And that's not the way that you go about this. That's not the way you ought to be conducting yourself. When I go into a store and I'm not wearing a mask, I'm not there to try to make a point. I'm just going about business as usual, because if that's the store's policy that I wear a mask and they want to come and say, sir, I'm sorry, but you have to have, that's fine. No big deal. I'm not here to have a debate with you. It's your store. Now, putting up a sign because before the governor said anything, before Greg Abbott came up with an executive order, no one was talking about masks,
right?
To the degree that they are now. And then all of a sudden you see signs going up in stores and all this stuff, and things changed. Okay, I do have an issue with that. It's still up to the store. Am I there to argue and to try to convince the manager to change their policy? No, because they're running a business, and that probably came from corporate anyhow. That's not the point. It's not about how can we fight back. It's just say no. Rosa Parks didn't fight back. She just said, no, I'm not moving. I'm not getting up and giving up my seat. And that was enough.
Yeah, and that's the irony we face here is regardless of the topic. I mean, I saw just the march on Washington the other day. They interviewed somebody saying, we're looking for new legislation. And I'm thinking, legislation has never freed anybody.
Right.
It has always been the people rising up to make the difference. If it weren't for the Rosa Parks, if it weren't for the Martin Luthers, if it weren't for so many other names that most of the time don't even get taught anymore, already in this short amount of time, then no change would have came about.
Right.
It was people driven. It was not government driven. They were going against those laws that the South was holding on to.
Yeah.
So, and again, so that power, that if the people will just take the power back and say, no, that's it.
Yep.
It's nothing huge, nothing violent. And why don't you take that into account the next time you go to vote? I mean, I've had some people come to me going, I'm tired of the way this stuff is going from the CARES Act and this, that, and the other. Well, remember that when you vote. That's what I tell them every time. Remember when you vote then.
Yeah, and it might be hard because it might be that, well, everyone that's on the ballot, they were in support of this, or the only ones I think that can actually have a chance of winning, they all support the same thing. Well, if you don't agree with what they did last time, then you probably shouldn't vote for them.
Again.
Yeah. And you know what? It might look a lot different. That ballot might end up looking a lot different when you turned it in than when you thought it would. And you might think, there was no chance that anyone I just voted for was going to win. What if everybody stopped thinking that way and just started actually supporting the people that actually do what they say they're going to do, the people that get up there and do right?
But isn't that the same concept as nullification? If I'm not going to support something that's completely unconstitutional and violates somebody's rights that I recognize, hey, that violates somebody's rights 2 states away.
Yeah.
I don't want to support that anyway.
No, you know what? There hasn't been a whole lot of, I've seen state governments that wanted to open up and Trump didn't agree with it. And did it directly affect us here in Texas? I don't think so. But there's other states where he was trying to tell them what they're going to do. I've got a huge issue with that. I've got a huge issue anytime any federal government agency entity decides that they're going to come in and tell the state what to do.
Well, and like you said, those cities that have the mass exodus, the people are putting the punishment on the city.
Oh yeah, voting with their feet.
They didn't need Trump to bring in the military.
Right.
The economy's leaving now.
Right.
Well, it's the same thing. If I'm not going to support something that's unconstitutional, why would I support the people who are continuing to push that out?
Right.
Again, if 1 million people just say no in California and it makes a difference, what happens if 1 million people say, no, I will not reelect you?
Yep.
Is that not the same thing as the idea of nullification, is saying, I'm not sending you back.
Right.
Because you did not stand for what was right.
And I think even more to that point, in the nullification on the individual level, it's when these things come up, what are you going to do? Okay, well, I voted or we voted for these people. Okay, what if you didn't vote for them?
Yep.
What if 51% voted and 49% didn't vote? What about what is an extreme minority that didn't vote for a certain bill to be passed, a certain amendment to be passed, or a certain leader to be elected? What if people just said, no, I'm not going to comply with that? There's no authority for you to dictate what goes in my body or to what goes on my body or how much of my personal life you get to run. I mean, so that's nullification on the individual level, and that gets back into that human behavior part that we were talking about before.
It does, and I will tell you as we wrap up, that is the part that scares me about all this, is that not only have we not taught 2 generations or more why there was restriction on the government, now we've taught them that what the government can do and should do and be empowered to do. They're all in the military. Think about it. That's those generations in the military. At some point, you look at, I think my idea is, how did British troops fire on their colonial counterparts when they were all supposed to be Englishmen? How did that happen? At some point, it was the complete buy-in that it was okay. Why? Because I'm benefiting from this. I'm incentivized to support this, so I'm going to support it. And I have to tell you, that's the part that scares me the most, is that, not scares me like in, ooh, I'm terrified, I won't do anything about it. But it's the part that concerns me the most is that when we've raised folks to be so much involved in ignorance, then what happens then when push comes to shove? Well, is there going to be a true accountability, a true forward thinking, a true holistic contextual group of people? And when mob mentality forms going, well, this is not right, they've overstepped, or is it going to be, well, I was told the government can do this, so it should do this, let's enforce it. And so to me, that's the problem we have that we're going to have to do, is that we're going to have to go back now and readdress generations behind us with context and why we had these things in place. Because without why, it's like teaching algebra to a kid in 8th grade. We need to learn this. So
right.
Without any buy-in, without any reason for its importance, they're not going to care.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically you're saying that the government schools didn't teach anything about the limitations of government to the
blows me away.
I know.
I just can't believe it.
What was that meme that had Charlie Brown?
Oh, it was Linus. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The government's not going to teach you what you need to know to overthrow it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's exactly it. And so at this point, I really appreciate you bringing this up to me, and I'll put a link on the bottom of our episode for Nullification by Tom Woods. It has both his commentary as well as the primary documents. And
there's a lot of other great resources for Nullification as well. The 10th Amendment Center, they do a lot of great work as far as getting education out there and even trying to draft legislation for various states. And they put out some awesome instructional videos on Nullification, and they do a heck of a job with it as well.
So I'll get you to get with me. We'll get all this linked up and put underneath there, because this has been a great learning experience. And what was great to me, though, and I'd encourage anybody listening to this, is this was not foreign. Not one part of this was new to me. Yeah. It was just seeing how formalized this thought process had already been for centuries.
Right.
So, yeah, it's good stuff, and I encourage anybody to delve off into this.
For sure. All right, with that, we're going to wrap it up, and I think there's a whole lot more we can cover on this at a later point. And because Nullification, man, it's such a big topic, because you can hit it at so many levels, and we've just begun to scratch the surface. All right, we're going to cover a portion of an essay by a 15th century Frenchman named Etienne de la Boétie. The title of the essay is "The Politics of Obedience, the Discourse of Voluntary Servitude." A very good friend of mine recently recited this excerpt, and given the conversation that we've had today, I find it especially fitting. Let us therefore admit that all those things to which he is trained and accustomed seem natural to man, and that only that is truly native to him which he receives with his primitive, untrained individuality. Thus, custom becomes the first reason for voluntary servitude. Men are like handsome racehorses who first bite the bit and later like it, and, rearing under the saddle a while, soon learn to enjoy displaying their harness and prance proudly beneath their trappings. Similarly, men will grow accustomed to the idea that they have always been in subjection, that their fathers lived in the same way. They will think they are obliged to suffer this evil, and will persuade themselves by example and imitation of others, finally investing those who order them around with proprietary rights, based on the idea that it has always been that way. There are always a few, better endowed than others, who feel the weight of the yoke and cannot restrain themselves from attempting to shake it off. These are the men who never become tamed under subjection, and who always, like Ulysses on land and sea, constantly seeking the smoke of his chimney, cannot prevent themselves from peering about for their natural privileges and from remembering their ancestors and their former ways. These are, in fact, the men who, possessed of clear minds and far-sighted spirit, are not satisfied, like the brutish mass, to see only what is at their feet, but rather look about them behind and before, and even recall the things of the past in order to judge those of the future, and compare both with their present condition. These are the ones who, having good minds of their own, have further trained them by study and learning. Even if liberty had entirely perished from the earth, such men would invent it. For them, slavery has no satisfactions, no matter how well disguised.
As the sun was setting on the bright meadows of Sherman, a rebel hand set the head